And I'm really happy to present another keynote session of our conference. Just arrived from the UN, Archbishop Bernardito Auza, permanent representative of the Holy See to the United Nations. Please welcome our guests with hands clapping. We are really happy Archbishop changed his schedule to be with us today, and we're truly honored to have you here. Rabbi Mark Klein joined us from Monmouth Reformed Temple. Welcome. Professor Mehna Safridi is a researcher here at Manhattan College. Her wonderful research on religious studies. She's also the director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center here at Manhattan College. We welcome you to this panel. We're really honored to have you with us. And Father René Mikalev, Pontifical Gregorian University, Refugee and Migrant Education Network. He really has all those wonderful ideas to put into our network. I can tell you, I meet him every week on our Hangout calls about the network, and I thank him for those wonderful ideas. He also obviously researches and teaches about migration, and he will be a moderator of this panel. I welcome you all, and I give the floor to you.
I think it's my honor to immediately give the floor to the Archbishop for the keynote, and then I'll try to moderate. Not to have two Catholic voices, I think I'd rather stick to questions and to helping you formulate and ask questions during the question time. Thank you.
Distinguished experts, migrants and refugees, my dear friends, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to join you this afternoon for this conference on global initiatives in refugee and migrant education, and specifically to speak about the moral and ethical responsibilities of universities in response to the global realities of migrants and refugees. I have delivered several talks and conferences during these last months on migrants and refugees, and above all about the Global Compact, having negotiated it on behalf of the Holy See. And the other day I was invited by the Macmillan International Center of International Studies at Yale, and as my introduction I said I'm pretty sure I'm not the first Catholic nor the first member of the Catholic clergy to speak at Yale, an institution which was originally founded by Puritan congregational clergy to educate ministers to purify Anglicanism from whatever vestiges of Roman Catholicism there was. So I say thank you for the invitation. I think I don't have to give that introduction here. I can trust that the Christian brothers will welcome me, and they are not giving information here to clean everything, purify everything from Catholic vestiges. On the contrary. Anyway, thank you very much for this invitation, and I really thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. With that, I would like to thank also our co-sponsors who are here. Just over a year ago, we just talked about this. Dr. Cernera just told us that a year ago, around 100 members of the Federation of Catholic Universities were gathered in Rome at the Gregorian University. And the topic was to discuss the responsibility and responses of universities to the situations of migrants and refugees. And at the conclusion of the conference, the participants were enthusiastically received by the Holy Father at the Sala di Concistoro in the Apostolic Palace. In that occasion, the Holy Father practically talked about two things. In a more general way, he spoke about the responsibility of all universities and schools of learning and centers of training, professional training, about their responsibilities. And then he briefly talked about the general moral responsibilities of Catholic universities in particular on this question. And also, not only towards migrants and refugees themselves, but also the responsibility of the university towards their own staff, their own faculty, and their own students, and their own people who are directly engaged with migrants and itinerants in order to give them a specific professional, technical, spiritual, and moral training so that they could deal with the concerns, the problems of the migrants in a more professional and ethical way. The Holy Father, in his very programmatic apostolic exhortation, the first major document that he released as Pope, the Joy of the Gospel, said that the kerygma has a clear social content and immediate moral implication centered on charity, because Christ has redeemed not only individuals, but the social relations among them. And for that reason, our loving response to God cannot be merely small personal gestures to particular persons' need, random acts of kindness, or what he phrases as charity à la carte. Rather, because Jesus came to announce and inaugurate the kingdom of God, he summons us to impact the world as salt, light, and leaven, seeking to help society grow in fraternity, justice, peace, and reverence for its others' dignity, especially those in need. I think that there is hardly any better document of the Catholic Church that expresses with such vividness and passion the inseparable divine and human elements of the Catholic faith than the Second Vatican Council's pastoral constitution in the modern world, Gaudium Spes, which in its celebrated opening paragraph states with these soaring words: "The joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in their hearts, for theirs is a community composed of men. United in Christ, they are led by the Holy Spirit in their journey to the kingdom of their Father, and they have welcomed the news of salvation which is meant for everyone. That is why this community realizes that it is truly linked with mankind and its history by the deepest of bonds." Now, after such a long introduction, my talk will consist in two parts. First, I shall examine the moral and ethical responsibilities of Catholic universities in general. Second, I shall try to illustrate how these principles apply to the three services that Pope Francis, in that speech a year ago, indicated to Catholic universities, namely, first, research, second, education, and third, social advocacy or social promotion. After that, I look forward to hearing the responses of Dr. Minaz Afridi and Rabbi Mark Klein and engaging in dialogue with them and with you. Now, the first part of my talk is in the moral and ethical responsibilities of Catholic universities in general. You know that the Catholic approach to education has always involved far more than classroom education, or worse, remote or rote memorization. When I was a student, we would always accuse the professors that we were spoon-fed, that we were asked to memorize text, etc. And now we realize that as teachers, it is indeed very difficult sometimes not to give them text to memorize, to occupy their minds. Anyway, that schools, Catholic schools in particular, and later universities, literally evolved from sacristies, gives us the idea that education aims in forming the entire person in a holistic way, not only in profane sciences, but also spiritually and morally. Catholic universities are dedicated not just to developing students' cognitive faculties, but to forming their freedom in connection with the true and the good, to recognizing their own and others' dignity, and helping them to use their knowledge in service of others. Faculty are more than just teachers. They are educators, both forming minds and literally leading people out of darkness into the light, transmitting not just knowledge, but practical wisdom and answers to the biggest questions, the most important questions of man. Education, after all, as you know, has roots in two Latin words. First, the more commonly known is educare, which means to mold, to form, to shape, and we might say in a more the term that is we always use to educate, which sometimes educate. What does it mean? It certainly means to shape, to mold, to form. But there is also the other verb, educere, which means to bring out, to lead out, to help somebody accomplish or realize his or her potential. So educare and educere, those are really the two important components of true education. Now the Church teaches that the integral formation of the human person, which is the purpose of education, includes the development of all human faculties of those who are learning, of the student, together with preparation for professional life, formation of ethical and social awareness, becoming aware of the transcendental, and that is religious education. Every educational institution has to strive to form strong and responsible individuals who are capable of making free and correct choices, thus preparing young people to open themselves more and more to reality and to form in themselves a clear idea of the meaning of life. An institution that sees the formation of values and good habits to others does not serve students or society well. In this regard, I cannot help but recall the haunting words of Chaim Ginot, who, having survived the Holocaust, became an educational psychologist and wrote to teachers about the indispensable place of proper ethical formation in education. Dear teacher, he wrote, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no one should witness: gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated doctors, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I am suspicious of education. My request is, help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated icons. Reading, writing, arithmetic, he said, are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. If we are going to help them, the students, our young people, become humane, we have to have a clear concept of who the human person is and the type of attitudes, virtues, and behaviors that we have to cultivate in them to make them more human. Catholic institutions, to serve human beings well, must therefore be distinguished, because they are Catholic, by the Christian vision of the human person. And ultimately, as said in the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, the fullest development of the human person is Jesus Christ himself. He who fully reveals the human person to himself and makes his supreme calling clear, and who shows us through his teaching, action, and very being that the human person cannot find himself except through the unselfish gift of himself to others. That's Gaudium et Spes, number 22 and number 24. So it is through this intellectual and ethical formation that we help our young people become truly human. I would now like to go through the heart of my talk, and that is the moral and ethical responsibilities of Catholic universities with regard to migrants and refugees. Last year, in the same talk, the Holy Father gave those three, we might say, asks, those three services from Catholic universities: research, education, and social advocacy. But in the same year also, the Congregation for Catholic Education issued a document entitled Educating to Fraternal Humanism, Building a Civilization of Love 50 Years After Populorum Progressio. So, you know, Populorum Progressio is one of the really celebrated encyclical of Paul VI. If you read it, it reads like the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development minus the controversial issues. It was so advanced ahead of its time, and yet we are 51 years away already from that document. In the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, one of really the good lines at the preamble is that the new development, the new name for peace is development. It said, there cannot be development without peace, and there cannot be peace without development. I say, that's Paul VI. Anyway, we do not realize that things evolve, but indeed, Paul VI, Populorum Progressio, was way ahead of his time. Anyway, in this document of the Congregation for Catholic Education, it says there that the contemporary world is being dramatically impacted by many crises: financial, political, social, demographic, environmental, but perhaps there is no other phenomenon in our time that has really impacted so deeply our world today, and that is migration. This document expresses the concern that the humanitarian tragedies of war and conflicts, the humanitarian crisis caused by natural disasters, the refugee crisis caused by persecutions, in many cases, the victims, instead of being welcomed and protected, are being treated indifferently, coldly, and indeed pushed back. Don't you think that that is the reality in so many cases, in so many parts of the world? And these victims, these migrants, these people on the move are many. They are not few. In 2017, according to the United Nations, there were 258 million people crossed international borders. That's 258 million people crossing international borders. around 68.5 million of them were forced to leave their homes because of very adverse factors, above all, wars and conflicts. The number of refugees grew by more than 60% just in 7 years. In 2010, there were around 15.8 million refugees. In 2017, there were almost 26 million, 25.8 million refugees. And many, actually, of those forced migrants are in the gray area, we might say. So many of those forced migrants could indeed be considered refugees because they were uprooted forcibly from their homelands by reasons, by causes that could qualify them as refugees. There are around 60 plus million or 49 million displaced, internally displaced persons. And added to that still are 41 million persons who are victims of human trafficking, mostly for sexual exploitation and forced labor. So these are the people on the move, voluntarily or non-voluntarily. So why are they moving? That ask, I think I just mentioned some of those causes. Mainly, since you are experts, I would just repeat. I mean, you know already that we call them the two main groups, the two main categories of reasons why people move. There are what we call the push factors, factors that compel people to leave their homes, their countries, like precisely wars and conflicts, which has become the main push factor in our times. It used to be famine, now it's really war. And they are correlated anyway. And then there is extreme want, there is hunger and famine. And then there are natural disasters. And the Global Compact now recognizes what they call the slow onset of natural catastrophes due to climate change. And that is also enshrined now in the Global Compact. That's why so many don't like it. And then there is what we call the pull factors. This means factors that attract people to specific destinations. We know very well many of them, like family reunification. Why would my parents come to the United States? Because their children were here. And then there are, of course, the search for better opportunities. There is the search for what we call life in larger freedom. And there is really the innate need or the innate tendency of every human being to a promised land, to happiness, to a place where they find themselves best and where they realize themselves best. So these are the reasons why people move. It is true that so many of those who move move voluntarily. For them, I think the Global Compact has not much of an importance. But there are just dozens of millions of people who move involuntarily and are forced to move. And that's really, I think, for them, that the Global Compact is very important. So in brief, and according to the document of the Congregation for Catholic Education, the phenomenon of migration is really one of the most challenging phenomena of our times. And it is also one of the pastoral priorities of Pope Francis, one of the main points of initiatives of the Holy See activity in the world, and for you here, it is your primary concern, migrants and refugees. And that's precisely the mission an experience that Pope Francis is counting on Catholic universities to help the church, the world, and particularly migrants and refugees through research, education, and social advocacy. I would like to turn to these three themes now. I think I have 15 minutes. Research. There is clearly a need for deeper studies on the remote causes of forced migrations so that we might be able to anticipate and address them and affirm people's prior right to remain in their own country in peace, security, and prosperity. If I were to summarize in a few points what the Holy See or what the Catholic Church thinks of migration, how does the Catholic Church see migration? One of those few points would be that we believe in the right to migrate and the prior right not to migrate. The Global Compact on Migration has recognized this, and modesty aside, the Holy See has started working on the phraseologies and terms used first in the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, and the terms used in the Global Compact now. There is a passage of the New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants that has remained and has never been renegotiated, and it was suggested by the Holy See. It is an appeal to the international community to create conditions so that people could exercise the right to remain, to live in peace and security in their own countries. There would not be challenges in migration because migration would otherwise be what we call safe, orderly, regular, and voluntary if these people were really not forced to migrate. And it is very much in two objectives of the Global Compact. And then the first objective of the Global Compact, in a way, is this is really the number one objective that you will find in the Global Compact, which is directly something to do with research. And that is to collect and utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies on migration. I think that sounds like music to your ears. To collect, utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies on migration. Because we know, unfortunately, in some countries, policies on migration are not necessarily based on the real facts and real experiences of migrants themselves. And they are not even based on scientific studies. So there is a need to amass, we might say, analyze and disseminate accurate, reliable, comparable data, disaggregated by sex, by age, by migration status, and migration reasons, etc., and other characteristics relevant for policymakers. I think that is really very important. That's why it's put there as the first objective of the Global Compact on migration. The Global Compact on refugees is even more specific. On paragraph 43, the Global Compact on refugees calls for the establishment of a global academic network on refugees. That's what we're doing. On forced displacement and statelessness issues involving universities, academic alliances, and research institutions, together with the UNHCR and other relevant stakeholders to facilitate research, training, and scholarship opportunities that will help achieve the goals of the Global Compact on refugees. Catholic educational institutions can obviously provide much help in these endeavors. It has the advantage of being a real international federation. It is not limited to one country. It's not limited to one culture. It's not limited to countries, what we call the receiving countries of migration. It's not limited to countries, what we call the origins or the sending countries of migration, etc. So it ideally could have all these data from all points of view, because as long as they collaborate with one another. Pope Francis, in that address to the participants of that conference last year at Glorian, said Catholic universities have always sought to harmonize scientific with theological research, placing reason and faith in dialogue. I believe it is appropriate to initiate further studies on the remote causes of forced migrations with the aim of identifying on how we could help people realize their right not to migrate. He specifically called for research on the negative, sometimes discriminatory and xenophobic first reactions to migrants in countries of ancient Christian tradition. If you add to it, unfortunately, I would agree. So that is exactly what the Holy Father expects from you in this area of research. Now, education, I think that's very clear. I would say that the responsibilities that Catholic universities are called to exercise in the area of education can take various forms. And I think I'd just like to mention three rapidly, which are rather, we might say, very, very common sense. First, the Catholic universities could help devise programs to ensure as much as possible that migrants and refugees receive an adequate education to help them integrate and contribute to their societies of origin, that's remittances, and destination to support themselves so that they would not be dependent on host communities, their families, and to be able to contribute to the common good. The Holy See and the many Catholic-inspired non-governmental organizations who actively participated in the whole process leading to the two global compacts on migration and refugees, and together with like-minded delegations, as we call them at the UN, vigorously pushed hard in the area of education for the benefit of migrants and refugees. The Holy See mission, the Holy See delegation to the negotiations held several side events, and one of them was specifically to lobby other delegations about recognition of titles, education titles, migrants migrating to other countries with titles that as much as possible they would be recognized in the host countries. In particular, we are pleased that in the Global Compact for Migration, we have this commitment that is for the international community to invest in skills development and facilitate mutual recognition of skills qualification and competences. That's really one of our specific contributions there. Not only us, but some other countries, but the wording is almost identical to our written proposals. That is objective number 18 out of 23 of the Global Compact, as you know. The Global Compact for Refugees has even more specific enumeration on what education should be, or the role of education in taking care of refugees. In paragraphs 68 and 69, we have the call for the expansion and enhancement of quality, inclusive national educational systems to facilitate access to refugees, above all children. And it calls for appropriately designed programs to respond to the different educational needs and levels, such as programs for early childhood development, programs for primary and elementary education, modules or programs for technical and vocational training, teaching capacities, and as the Holy Father also recommends, even online education, because people in the camps don't have to move, or if they are not allowed to move outside the camps, then they still have access to this education online. The Global Compact on Refugees also specifically calls on support to recognize the equivalency of academic, professional, and vocational qualifications, just like the Global Compact on Migration, and encourages educational institutions to try to help them, let's say, find a scholarship, help them obtain student visas, if that scholarship means going to another country, and help them find all sorts of educational opportunities. Catholic universities certainly can become leaders in this field. Pope Francis last year specifically expressed his hope that Catholic universities will adopt programs aimed at promoting the education of refugees at various levels, both by the provision of distance courses for those who live in camps, I just said that, and other refugee centers, and through the granting of scholarships enabling them to continue their education. So that is really one form in the field of education. Provide all forms and types and levels of education as much as possible for migrants and refugees. The second form, the second contribution, we might say, that Catholic universities could contribute to the overall challenges of migration is that universities to provide specific professional training to pastoral workers and volunteers, teachers and professors on how to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants and refugees. Let us recall here that Pope Francis' summary of the Catholic consideration or the Catholic vision of migration is summarized in these 4 verbs: to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate. The Holy Father said that providing this specific, technical, professional, human, and spiritual formation of those who are directly in contact with migrants and refugees, those who are what you call on the ground, is a pressing task for Catholic universities. Underline that. The third contribution that Catholic universities are called to give is, and definitely not less important than the first two, is with regard to the education of its students. Students, some of whom will become society's movers and shakers, as political leaders, as businessmen, as civil society leaders, as culture shapers or formers. For this reason, the students need to receive, according to the Holy Father, a careful understanding of the migratory phenomenon from a perspective of justice, global co-responsibility, and communion in cultural diversity. We call that unity in diversity. One of the keywords of the Global Compact on Migration is shared responsibility. In its vision of migration, the vision of migration of the Global Compact is based really on 3 fundamental principles. And one of those 3 fundamental principles is shared responsibility. We agree that this global phenomenon of migration cannot be faced by one country alone, much less by one individual or institution alone, but by all of us. That is shared responsibility. So I think I will end there because, I'm already 2 minutes ahead. I'll be behind. So that's education. So I will just, there's still the third. The third specific contribution that Pope Francis is asking from you, Catholic universities, is in the area of social advocacy. This is where two of the four verbs of Pope Francis, to promote and to integrate, really have very deep impact. The Global Compact for Migration, Objective 17, commits the international community to eliminate all forms of discrimination and promote evidence-based public discourse to shape perceptions of migration. I think this is very important, and we are called to do that. The Global Compact for Refugees as well has a very specific recommendation on this on paragraph 84. It says that in order to foster good relations between communities, calls for programs and projects to enhance understanding of the plight of the refugees through engaging children, adolescents, and youth through sports and cultural activities, language learning, and the rest, etc. You know all those things already, right? So those are the three contributions, services, really, that the Holy Father, that we as a church ask from Catholic universities in the area of research, in the area of provision of education, and in the area of social promotion and social advocacy. I think those three services required from you really summarizes what the Holy Father and what the Church expects from Catholic universities, and that these universities have that moral obligation to contribute that. I would just like to conclude by saying that the Holy Father, in his message on the World Day of Migrants and Refugees last January 14, said that the Lord Jesus entrusts to the Church motherly love every person forced to leave their homeland in search of a better future. The Church is resolutely committed, the Holy Father said, to welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating everyone on the move, and calls in the international community as we approach the Marrakesh Conference in December 10 and 11 to take decisive action in support of migrants and refugees to save their lives and protect their rights, sharing the responsibility on a global level. This solidarity, the Holy Father said, is a great responsibility which the Church intends to share with all believers and all men and women of goodwill. Thank you very much.